Take her things and get out of this house right now." "Don't say anything to her children." Marco's order still echoed in my head as I stood in the damp, cold alley in Jamaica Plain, Boston. In front of me, Hannah, my daughter, held up a large syringe filled with a clear liquid. Behind me, Patrick, my son, blocked the exit, his hand gripping an iron bar. They are my children. I carried them, gave birth to them, stayed up all night when they had fevers, taught them to take their first steps, speak their first words, write their own names. And yet, in the blackened darkness of this alley, I was forced to swallow a horrifying truth. For 9 months, my 2 children had been secretly poisoning their own mother. "Sorry, Mom," Hannah said, her voice cold as ice. "Love can't pay debts, and you're worth $800,000 when you die." How did I get pushed to this? How could a mother face death at the hands that once held her shirt while she taught them to walk? It all began that morning when I discovered a small stain of water on the ceiling. I never imagined that anonymous drip would strip away the veil on a meticulously planned murder plot. A plot that, if not uncovered in time, would leave me with only 2 months to live. My name is Barbara O'Neill. I live in Jamaica Plain, Boston, and this is the story of the day I discovered that the children I loved most had turned my home into my execution chamber. If you like true stories told plainly, deeply, and breathlessly like this, subscribe to the channel to follow the full series and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next part. Open question. What did the water stain on the ceiling lead me to in the basement? And why was a single small detail enough to expose an otherwise perfect murder plan? Let's go to the next part. That morning began like every morning for the past 7 years. Mornings I had grown used to being alone. 6 o'clock. I woke with the familiar headache, like someone was tightening an iron band around my temples. Old age, I told myself, the phrase I had repeated for 9 months. I had no idea the pain was not from age. It was the effect of a chemical mixture my daughter had been preparing, silently sprayed into the bedroom air every night through the ventilation system. I went down to the kitchen and made coffee in the little white ceramic mug with a floral rim, my mother's keepsake. Morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, making dust motes dance in the air. This house meant everything to me. Every corner held a story. Every object carried a memory. The cream-colored wall in the living room. I painted it myself 3 years ago, 4 years after Seamus, my husband, had passed. That day Patrick stood beside me and said, "Let me help you, Mom, don't make it so heavy." I can still feel his arm around my shoulder, hear the worry in his voice. Looking back now, had Patrick already begun calculating the value of this house then? The dark wooden dining set came from my parents. I remember last Christmas, only 8 months ago, the whole family gathered around the tree. Hannah kissed my cheek and said, "You're the best mother in the world. I love you so much." In the photo taken that day, Hannah's smile was radiant. Now I know that as soon as that photo was put away, Hannah had begun recording my health symptoms in a secret notebook. Every caring word, every embrace, every kiss, nothing but a curtain hiding a murder plan. The family photos on the mantel, I look at them every day. My wedding photo with Seamus, Patrick at age 3, clutching a toy car, Hannah in her graduation gown, smiling next to me. Those beautiful moments now feel like shards of glass cutting my heart. I took a sip of coffee and looked out the window. Jamaica Plain was as peaceful as ever, neighbors walking dogs, bus line 39 rumbling past the top of the street. Everything was normal. But inside this house, beneath that ordinary surface, a crime was unfolding day after day, hour after hour, minute after minute. Patrick left the house at 1:30 in the morning. My son works for a construction company, always leaving early and coming home late, or so I thought. The truth? Patrick was running from loan sharks. Marco Dragic and his crew had shown up at the job site and threatened him. They gave Patrick 2 months to pay $120,000 or they would teach him what pain is. Hannah was still sleeping upstairs. She had moved back in with me 6 months earlier after divorcing Christopher Vaughn. 38 years old, she came home with 2 suitcases, and a sadness I assumed came from a failed marriage. Hannah said she needed time to heal, to find herself again. And I, a naive mother, opened my arms. I did not know Hannah's return was not accidental. Christopher had hired a private investigator and found Hannah had an affair. In the divorce, she received not a single cent, utterly bankrupt. When Patrick approached Hannah with a solution for their financial troubles, Hannah agreed without hesitation. That solution was me. Or rather, my death. Life in the house had been odd for months, but I didn't notice. I woke at 6, made coffee that no one drank. I watered plants, cleaned, watched the news. I cooked lunch that no one sat down to eat with me. I read books. Then I cooked dinner, and the family ate in silence. Patrick always looked exhausted, his eyes avoiding mine. "Is something wrong?" I asked. "No, Mom, just a lot of work." Now I understand. He couldn't bear to look at the mother he was slowly killing. Hannah shut herself in her room. She would poke her head out to eat quickly, then vanish behind the door. "What do you do in there?" I asked. "I'm looking for a job, trying to find a new path." The truth, Hannah was digging through materials about poisonous chemicals, dosages, speed of action, perfecting a recipe for a trace-free murder. The days passed like tiny drops of water, slow, monotonous, tasteless. I had grown accustomed to loneliness since Seamus died. He was taken by a sudden heart attack 7 years ago, leaving me with a large house and a considerable life insurance payout. At first, I nearly fell apart, but Patrick and Hannah were there, holding my hand at the funeral, staying to care for me in those early weeks, saying, "Don't worry, Mom, you still have us." And I believed them. I believed I was lucky to have dutiful children. I believed that even though Seamus was gone, family love remained. I was so foolish. If someone had asked me then, "Is your life peaceful?" I would have nodded. But sometimes to reveal a nightmare, a very small sound is enough. A faint tick is enough to shatter every illusion. That morning, everything began to crack. As soon as I took a sip of coffee and looked out to the garden, I heard a strange sound. Tick, tick, tick. A dripping sound. I looked up at the dining room ceiling. A damp patch was spreading across the white paint. From the center of that damp patch, droplets fell steadily, like the pulse of a dying heart. Tick, tick, tick. I stood up and placed a bowl under the leak. The damp spot was right below the upstairs bathroom, the room Patrick had insisted on redoing 2 years earlier. "Mom, we have to replace the plumbing," he had said. "Let me handle it. I'll hire the workers and supervise. You don't need to worry," and I let him handle it. I let strangers come in and out of my house for weeks. I let Patrick supervise alone. I even felt grateful to have such a thoughtful son. I did not know that, in those weeks, Patrick had done more than fix pipes. He had built a complex system in the basement, a machine designed to kill me slowly, quietly, leaving no traces. Looking at the stain on the ceiling, I felt uneasy. Something was wrong, a vague premonition, like a whisper. "Be careful." I grabbed my phone and called Patrick. "Hi, the ceiling is leaking." Right under the upstairs bathroom, a short pause, then Patrick's voice, tenser than usual. "Leaking? That's odd. I just finished the repairs. Can you come home and check?" "Mom, I'm at the job site. I can't come back." "Call a plumber. I'll send you a number." "But the company from last time had a warranty, didn't they?" "Why not call them?" Silence again. Longer this time. "No, don't call them. I'll send another plumber. This one's better." There was something strange in Patrick's voice, hurried, anxious, as if I had touched something that made him panic. But I didn't understand why. It was just a leak. "All right, dear," I said. "I'll wait for the number." I hung up, the unease rising, but then I reassured myself. He must be busy. Half an hour later, I received a message. "Marco Santoro. 617-555-0147. Very good, Plumber. Call him now, I dialed. A warm, deep male voice. Marco Santoro. How can I help you? My dining room ceiling is leaking, probably from the upstairs bathroom. Can you come and take a look? Yes, ma'am. I can be there within an hour. What is your address? I read the address, hung up, and felt relieved. At least the problem would soon be solved. I did not know that that call had just saved my life, and that the man named Marco Santoro was about to expose the darkest secret I had never imagined. Exactly 1 hour later, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a man in his 50s, of average build, his hair already graying. He wore glasses, kind eyes behind them, blue overalls, and carried an old toolbox, the kind that had clearly followed him through years of work. Mrs. O'Neill, right? I'm Marco Santoro. Yes, please come in. The problem is here. I led Marco into the dining room and pointed up at the damp patch on the ceiling. He looked up, frowned, then nodded slightly as if already forming a theory. I'll need to check the upstairs bathroom first, he said. Then I'll go down to the basement to look at the main pipes. Of course, take your time. I'll be here if you need anything. Marco climbed the stairs with the steady confidence of a seasoned worker. Soon came the familiar sounds, tools clinking, screws turning, water running for a test. Everything seemed normal. 10 minutes later, Marco came back down, his face thoughtful. Ma'am, I need to go down to the basement. Where's the door? In the kitchen. Do you want me to come with you? No, that's okay. I can handle it. It might take a little while, I nodded, and went back to my chores, though there was something in his voice that unsettled me, a faint tension that hadn't been there before. Marco disappeared behind the basement door. I heard his footsteps on the wooden stairs. Each creaking step sounded like a groan. Then silence. Only distant metallic noises came from below. Tools tapping, pipes being knocked, something heavy being dragged. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat at my favorite spot at the dining table. From there, I could clearly see the damp patch on the ceiling. It had stopped dripping, a good sign. Maybe Marco had found the source and was fixing it. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 11 a.m. Hannah was probably still asleep. Since her divorce, her schedule had been completely erratic. Some nights I'd hear her pacing around until 2 or 3 in the morning. Some days she wouldn't leave her room until noon. I worried about Hannah. A mother has that instinct. You just know when something's wrong with your child, no matter how grown they are. Hannah had lost weight, dark circles under her eyes, her skin pale. I urged her to see a doctor, but she always brushed it off. I'm fine, Mom. I just need time to process everything with Christopher. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just heartbreak. Yes, Christopher had his issues, but what haunted Hannah seemed deeper, something gnawing at her from within. Now I know. Hannah didn't lose sleep out of guilt toward her husband. She lost sleep out of guilt toward her mother. Every night, in the dark, she faced what she was doing, and every morning she chose to continue. That's the truly terrifying part, not a moment of madness, but a deliberate choice repeated every day. Today, Mom will keep breathing poison, then tomorrow, and the next day. Until she dies. The faint noises from the basement continued. Marco was meticulous. Occasionally, I heard him move, drag something heavy, tap on pipes. I liked that kind of thoroughness. Too many workers these days just rush the job. I decided to start lunch. Maybe the smell of food would wake Hannah, and we could eat together like we used to. I opened the fridge, chicken, fresh vegetables, rice, enough for her favorite chicken stew. As I chopped onions, I suddenly remembered those long-ago Sundays. Seamus sitting on the sofa reading the paper, Patrick playing outside with toy cars, and little Hannah standing on a stool to reach the counter, bouncing on her toes to help me in the kitchen. "Mommy, can I cut the onions?" her 5-year-old voice chirped. "You're too little, sweetheart." "Let Mommy do it. You can watch, but I want to help. I'm a big girl now." Then she hugged my waist tight, pressing her cheek against me, warm, loving. "I love you more than anyone in the world, Mommy. You're the best." Tears dropped onto the onion slices, not from their sting, but from the ache rising inside me. That little girl, the one who once loved me unconditionally, was now the same person calculating how to kill me most efficiently. Can a child really change that much? Or had I never truly known my daughter at all? Had I spent all these years only seeing what I wanted to see? If someone asked me now, what breaks a family apart? I wouldn't say arguments. Sometimes it's the silence that lasts too long, a bedroom door that never opens, a glance that slides past each other at the dinner table. And beneath that silence, the truth builds up like toxic gas, waiting only for a spark to ignite it. Footsteps creaked from the basement stairs. I startled. Marco was coming up, but his steps were different this time, slower, heavier, like a man who had just seen something terrible. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, face pale, hands trembling as he closed his toolbox. His eyes flicked to me, then back toward the basement door, then to me again, as if weighing something grave. "Did you fix it?" "Find the problem?" I asked, wiping my hands on my apron. Marco stared at me for a long moment, a strange, searching look, like he was trying to decide what kind of person I was. Then he looked toward the basement again. "Mrs. O'Neill," his voice rough, "I need to talk to you." "Can we sit down for a moment?" His tone wasn't calm or professional anymore. It carried urgency, a tension that made me instantly alert. "Of course. Is it serious? Is the leak bad?" "Not exactly a leak, ma'am." Marco pulled out a chair across from me, set down his toolbox, removed his glasses, and wiped them. An almost nervous gesture. His hands were still shaking. "I don't understand. So, what caused the damp spot on the ceiling?" Marco stayed silent for a moment, as if searching for the right words. Then he met my eyes. "Do you live here alone?" The question made me pause. "No, I live with my 2 children. They're adults, but they've moved back home temporarily." "Do they have access to the basement?" "Of course." "It's their house, too. Why do you ask?" Marco leaned forward, lowering his voice as if afraid someone might overhear. "Mrs. O'Neill, what I found down there has nothing to do with plumbing. Someone has installed something in your basement, something that shouldn't be there." My heart started pounding. "What? What kind of thing?" "It's hard to explain briefly, but it's definitely not accidental. Someone deliberately placed it there, and that person knows this house very well." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. "You mean someone broke in and installed something in my basement?" "No, ma'am." I don't think it was a stranger. Those words hung between us like a poisonous cloud. I couldn't process what he was implying. "I don't understand." "What are you saying?" Marco stood, walked to the window, looked out into the garden, as if to make sure we were alone. "Have you experienced any strange symptoms lately? Unusual fatigue, headaches, insomnia?" The question stunned me. "Yes, I've been tired. Frequent headaches." "But I'm getting older. That's normal." "What about your children? Have they had anything similar?" I thought for a moment. No, I hadn't heard Patrick or Hannah complain of headaches or fatigue. Hannah had her own troubles, but both of them seemed healthy. "No, they seem fine." Marco nodded, as if my answer confirmed his fears. "Ma'am, I need you to listen very carefully. What I'm about to say is difficult to accept, but you have to believe me." He came back to the table, sat across from me again, and took my hands in his. His palms were cold and damp. "The device I found in your basement is connected to the house's ventilation system. Specifically, it feeds directly into your bedroom." "My bedroom? What do you mean?" "I mean someone installed a mechanism to release toxins into the air you breathe. Those substances are slowly making you sick." The words sounded distant, like coming through a tunnel. Number. That couldn't be. Things like this didn't happen in real life. Not in my house, not with my family. That's impossible. There must be a mistake. Maybe it's an air purifier installed during the last renovation that you didn't recognize. Marco shook his head firmly. Ma'am, I've been doing this for over 20 years. I've seen every kind of plumbing, ventilation, and air filtration system. What's down there isn't a purifier. It's something entirely different. I jumped up from my chair. I had to move, do something, anything to release the panic pressing in on my chest. This can't be true. There has to be a reasonable explanation. There is, Marco said quietly. Someone in this house wants to hurt you. Marco's words tolled in my head like a death knell. Someone in this house wants to hurt you. I clutched the back of the chair, feeling my knees about to buckle. No, impossible. My children would never hurt me. I raised them. I love them. They love me. You're wrong. Marco slowly stood, wearing the face of a man about to deliver bad news. Mrs. O'Neill, I know this is hard to accept, but I need you to come down to the basement with me and see for yourself what I found. I shook my head violently. I don't want to see anything. I want you out of my house now. You're insane if you think I'll believe my own children. Please, he cut in, gentle but firm. Just 5 minutes. If after seeing it, you still think I'm wrong, I'll leave immediately, and you'll never have to hear from me again. There was something in his voice that made me pause. He didn't sound like a liar or a madman. He sounded like someone who had just seen something terrible and didn't know how to say it without shattering my world. In short, what exactly did you find down there? It's better if you see it. Words won't do it justice. I glanced toward the stairs, where Hannah was likely still asleep. Then I looked at the basement door. For 40 years I'd gone down there hundreds of times to do laundry, fetch Christmas decorations, store things we didn't use. A familiar, safe space. All right, I said at last, but only 5 minutes. Marco nodded and took a flashlight from his toolbox. You'll need this. It's dim in that corner. I followed Marco to the basement door, my heart thudding so hard I was sure he could hear it. We stepped down the creaking wooden steps, a sound I'd heard 1,000 times, but now each creak felt like a warning. The basement smelled as musty and old as always. Cardboard boxes lined the walls. The washer and dryer sat in their usual corner. Garden tools hung neatly. Everything looked normal. This way. Marco lowered his voice, guiding me to the far corner behind the furnace. I followed, my eyes adjusting to the gloom. Marco clicked on the flashlight and shone it at a section of wall I rarely went near. Look carefully behind those pipes. At first I saw nothing unusual, just ordinary plumbing. But then, following the beam of light, I saw it. Wedged among the familiar ductwork was a slender system of tubing made of what looked like specialized plastic, connected to a metal box about the size of a toaster oven. What is that? Come closer. I stepped in, and Marco trained the light directly on the device. Now I could see it clearly. Multiple compartments. Some holding pale blue liquid, some yellow clear, some colorless. Other compartments had digital timers with red numbers blinking. This connects to your home's ventilation, Marco whispered. Specifically, these tubes go straight into the airflow that feeds your bedroom. I touched one thin tube, my hand shaking. It was warm, as if it had been running recently. What are those liquids? I'm not a chemist, but from the odor and viscosity, I'd guess they're substances that gradually affect anyone who inhales them. Chronic fatigue, immune suppression, potentially more severe over time. My mind refused to take it in, but it was obvious this required technical knowledge, a careful installation, not something done in an afternoon. Exactly, Marco nodded. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. And they had ongoing access to your home. I suddenly remembered the bathroom remodel 2 years ago. Workers in and out for weeks. Patrick personally overseeing everything, insisting I not worry about technical details. "The renovation," I whispered. "We had crews in the house for weeks." "Who supervised that work?" I didn't want to answer. I didn't want to turn suspicion into words. "My son, Patrick." He handled everything. Marco nodded, his expression darkening. "This system wasn't installed in 2 days. It needed planning, specialized materials, and someone with knowledge of ventilation and basic chemistry." A wave of nausea climbed my throat. "Patrick works in construction. He knows how to do things like this. And his sister?" "Hannah. She studied chemistry in college before she got married." The pieces began to lock together, horrifyingly, perfectly. The symptoms I'd endured for months, relentless fatigue, headaches, weakness, which I'd blamed on age, Patrick's insistence on redoing the bathroom, Hannah's sudden return just as my health began to slide. "How long has this system been running?" I asked, my voice ragged. Marco glanced at the timers. "Judging by component wear and residue in the tubes, I'd say at least 8 to 9 months. 9 months. The very moment I started feeling drained, the very moment I thought I'd come down with some ailment of old age. "My God," I murmured, leaning on the wall to keep from collapsing. Sometimes a family doesn't need an explosion to break apart, just a number, 8 or 9 months, long enough for routine to become a trap, long enough for kinship to erode in silence. And once you see the timeline, you can't help but ask, each day of those 9 months, what did they think when they looked into my eyes? "There's one more thing," Marco said, angling the light toward another part of the device, a digital screen with readings and graphs. "This system is programmed to increase the concentration over time, meaning the effects get worse as it goes." "How much worse?" "If untreated and exposure continues, it could be fatal within the next few months." The words slammed into me like an avalanche. My children, my own flesh and blood, were trying to kill me slowly. Not a burst of rage, not a moment of madness. Calculated, systematic, letting me rot in silence before I died. "Why?" I whispered. "Why would they do this?" Marco switched off the flashlight, gently took my hand, and led me back toward the stairs. "That's a question only they can answer. Right now, you need to get out of this house." We climbed in silence. My legs were cotton, my mind flickering. At the kitchen, reality struck me again. This was my home, my refuge. The place where I raised my children, where I wept as I buried my husband, where I planned to spend my old age, and my children had turned it into a torture chamber. "Mrs. O'Neill," Marco said firmly, "listen carefully. Take only essential documents, leave the house now, and do not tell your children where you're going." "But I can't just leave. This is my home. They're my children." "They're trying to kill you," Marco said bluntly, a sharpness in his tone that jolted me. "There is no conversation worth having with people who've gone this far." I looked up the stairs. Hannah was up there, probably just waking, about to come down for lunch. Hannah, the sweet child who held me when her father died, who cried in my arms when her marriage fell apart. "I can't believe Hannah is involved," I said weakly. "The chemistry knowledge required here isn't elementary." Whoever formulated those mixtures knew precisely what each substance does and at what concentrations Hannah had studied chemistry. She'd worked in a lab years before she married. "I need to speak to them. They owe me an explanation." Marco shook his head hard. "No. Once they know you've discovered this, they could act rashly. Your safety comes first." The kitchen's silence turned deafening. I could hear the clock ticking, the fridge humming, and the sound of my own breath. Marco watched me, his eyes both compassionate and urgent, waiting for me to process the scope of the truth just exposed. I need to sit," I stammered, dropping into a chair. My hands trembled uncontrollably. I lifted my coffee cup, but it clattered against the saucer, spilling over the edge. Marco stepped forward and gently took the cup from me. I know this is devastating, but every minute you stay here is dangerous. Dangerous? They're my children, Marco. I changed their diapers, held them through nightmares, spent hours teaching them homework. How could they want to kill me? My voice broke on the last word. The tears I'd been holding back finally burst, spilling like a river of pain. Marco sat opposite, his face grave yet understanding. In my line of work, I've seen a lot. I've walked into homes where people kept terrible secrets. What I saw down there isn't the product of impulse. It's meticulous, planned, carried out by people who considered every detail. But there has to be an explanation. Maybe they're being blackmailed, or someone forced them. Who could force two adults to install a poisoning system in their own mother's home? And if they were being blackmailed, why didn't they come to you for help? His reasoning was cold and undeniable. Money, I whispered. It must be for money. Marco leaned toward me. What money are you talking about? When Seamus, my husband, died, he left a considerable life insurance payout, plus our lifetime savings. And this house, its value has risen a lot since the Jamaica Plain revitalization. How much are we talking about? Between the insurance, the savings, and the property value, nearly $800,000. Marco nodded, his voice dropping. That's enough to make desperate people do terrible things. But they're not desperate. Patrick has a job. Hannah will get money from the divorce. Are you sure? When was the last time you actually talked with them about their finances? I fell silent. The truth was, I hadn't had a real conversation with either of them for months. Patrick was always busy, exhausted, or irritable. Hannah kept her door shut or went out without saying where. I don't know what their finances are like, I admitted. I just assumed they were fine because they never asked me for help. Maybe because they knew your money would come to them another way. That sentence slapped me in the face. Nausea rose as I pictured my children sitting together, planning my death, calculating how long it would take, dividing up my assets while I was still alive. They've lived with me for months, eaten at my table, pretended to love me, knowing exactly what they were doing. How is anyone supposed to bear that? I don't know, Marco said softly. But people who can do that are dangerous. And you need to get away from them now. A sound upstairs made me jump. Footsteps on the second-floor boards. Hannah was awake. Mom? Her voice called down. Who are you talking to? Marco and I looked at each other. In his eyes, tension and urgency. We had to leave before things spiraled. Tell her I'm the plumber and I'm almost finished, Marco whispered. The plumber, sweetheart, I called back, trying to sound normal. He's fixing the leak. Okay, I'll be down in a minute. Marco shot to his feet. You have to go now. Where are your important documents? In the safe in my bedroom. Go get them. Take only what's essential. I'll keep your daughter occupied. I stood on shaking legs. Every stair felt like a blade. My heart pounded so loud I was sure the whole house could hear it. My bedroom looked the same as always. The bed neatly made. Family photos on the nightstand. The closet arranged by color. But now I knew poison had seeped into this space, engineered to wear me down to death. I opened the safe with trembling hands. Inside were my will, the deed, insurance papers, bank information. I gathered everything and stuffed it into a small bag. I opened the closet and took a few basics. As I packed, my eyes stopped on a photo on the dresser. Last Christmas, just 8 months ago. Patrick, Hannah, and I smiling by the tree. Patrick's arm around my shoulder, Hannah kissing my cheek. They looked like the loving children I believed in. But now I knew that even then, they had already begun poisoning me. Patrick had installed the system. Hannah had calculated the doses. They smiled, pretended to love their mother while tightening the countdown clock on my life. I put the photo in my bag, not to remember, but to remind myself, those closest can be the most dangerous. Voices drifted up from downstairs. Hannah had come down and was speaking with Marco. Her tone was calm, even cheerful, as if a murderer weren't chatting with the man who had just exposed her. I crept down the stairs. From the last step, I saw Hannah in the kitchen. Pink sleepwear, slippers, hair tousled from sleep. She looked heartbreakingly innocent. "So it was just old pipes," Hannah said. "That's right," Marco replied in a professional tone. "Everything's fixed. You don't need to worry." "Good. Mom's been really worried about that leak." Hannah turned and saw me coming down with the bag. "Where are you going, Mom?" I froze. How could I lie to my child? How could I pretend things were normal knowing what she had done? "I have a few errands to take care of," I managed, trying to steady my voice. "Can I come with you?" "I'm free today." The offer chilled me. If I left with Hannah, what would happen? What had she planned in case she suspected me? "No need, sweetheart. Just boring bank stuff." Marco came over with his toolbox. "Well then, Mrs. O'Neill, the job's done. You shouldn't have any more problems." I understood the cue. Time to go. "How much do I owe you?" $60. I took out the cash and handed it to him. Our eyes met. In Marco's gaze, I saw resolve and protection. "Thank you very much," I said, ordinary words that carried a weight Hannah could not grasp. "Happy to help." Marco headed for the front door. I followed, feeling Hannah's eyes on my back. "Are you sure you don't want me to come?" "You look pale, Mom." I looked at her one last time. My youngest, whom I had carried, nursed through fevers, soothed through childhood nightmares. Now I saw her with different eyes, and what I saw terrified me. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I'll be back later." "I love you," Hannah said, smiling, sweet as honey. Words that once warmed my heart now sounded like poison. "How could you say you love me while killing me day by day?" "I love you too," I lied, because I didn't know what else to do. I stepped out of the house I'd lived in for 40 years, not knowing whether I would ever return. The outside air hit my face like a revelation. I hadn't realized how suffocating the inside had become until I escaped it. Marco moved quickly to the truck parked out front. I followed on unsteady legs. "Get in," he said, opening the passenger door. "We need to leave before your daughter gets suspicious." I climbed in, clutching my bag like a life preserver. Marco started the engine, and we pulled away from the block. In the rearview mirror, my house shrank. The place where I'd been happy, where I'd cried, where I'd raised my children, where I had nearly died without knowing it. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "To somewhere safe where we can think clearly," Marco said, eyes on the road. "There's a cafe at Copley Square about 20 blocks away. We'll plan the next steps and call the authorities." "The authorities? You mean the police?" "Yes. What we found is attempted murder. This isn't something we can handle ourselves." The phrase attempted murder reverberated. My children weren't merely ungrateful or greedy, they were would-be killers who had lived with me, eaten my food, pretended to care about my health, while meticulously planning my death. "I can't believe this is real," I murmured, staring out the window. Familiar streets, suddenly strange and threatening. "I know it's hard to accept," Marco said, "but you made the right decision leaving." My phone buzzed, a text from Hannah. "Mom, are you okay?" "You've been gone longer than usual," I showed Marco. His face tightened. "They've started tracking your movements. Text back that you're fine, but stuck at the bank." I typed what Marco said, my fingers shaking. "That means we have to move fast," Marco said after I hit send. "If they get suspicious, they might dismantle the setup and destroy the evidence." "What do you think they'll do if they know I know?" Marco looked at me, worry in his eyes. "People who built a sophisticated killing system won't just let this go. Cornered, they might try something more desperate, more direct." The truth sent a shiver through me. We drove through Boston streets, past Massachusetts General Hospital, across Boston Common, toward Copley Square. With every block we put between us and Jamaica Plain, I felt like I was leaving my entire life behind. When you lose your mooring, ask yourself, What do you still have in your hands? I had the truth, a witness, and time. But time was not on my side. From now on, every minute could tip between life and death. But Marco was right. That was no longer my life. Only an illusion built on betrayal and a slow death. Now I had to face the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The cafe at Copley Square was cozy, dark wooden tables, the smell of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the soft clink of spoons against cups. Marco chose a table toward the back, far from the windows, and right next to the emergency exit. When I realized he was mapping an escape route, the reality of the situation slammed into me all over again. A young waitress approached. "What can I get you to?" "2 coffees," Marco said. "And a slice of cake for the lady. She's had a very hard day." She nodded and left. Marco waited until it was quiet around us before continuing. "Mrs. O'Neill, we need to discuss our options." Option 1. Call the police immediately and report what we found. And then what happens? They'll go to your house with a warrant, examine the device, and arrest your children if the evidence is strong enough. The thought of seeing Patrick and Hannah in handcuffs, led to a squad car, twisted my stomach. But the alternative was letting them continue until they killed me. What's the second option? We document everything ourselves first. Take photos, collect chemical samples, assemble a solid file before bringing in the authorities. That would mean going back to the house? Not necessarily. I can return under the pretense of checking whether the repair is holding, then photograph the evidence. The waitress returned with 2 coffees and a slice of chocolate cake. I hadn't ordered it, but sugar was exactly what I needed to swallow the deluge of information. "Why are you doing this for me?" "You don't even know me." Marco took a sip, then spoke slowly. "I lost my mother 5 years ago. She died of cancer, but for months before the diagnosis, she complained of strange symptoms the doctors couldn't explain: crippling fatigue, shortness of breath, weakness. Oh God. Only after she passed did we discover my younger brother had been siphoning money from her account and faking her medications." Marco's voice caught, old wounds, still raw. "Was your brother arrested?" "Yes, but only for theft. By the time we learned about the medication, it was too late to prove it contributed to her death." "That's why you want to help me gather airtight evidence." "Exactly. I don't want your children to walk free." I bit into the cake, tasting only ash. Talking about my children as if they were criminals, I never thought I'd see this day. "Have you noticed changes in their behavior these past months?" Marco asked. I thought. Patrick has been more distant. Avoids long conversations, always busy with jobs and projects. At dinner, he avoids my eyes. And Hannah? Since moving back, she's withdrawn. I assumed it was post-divorce. I thought Patrick was stressed from work, and Hannah was gloomy from the breakup. Maybe that's exactly what they wanted you to think. My phone vibrated. Patrick calling. "Mom, Linda says you've been out all day. Is everything okay?" His voice was taut, holding something back. "You should answer," Marco said, "but be careful what you say." I picked up. "Yes, son. I just had some errands to run." "What errands?" "It's strange. You didn't say you'd be out this long." "Since when do I have to report my schedule to my children?" I kept my tone calm but firm. An uneasy pause. "You're right. We just worry when you change your routine." "My routine?" It hit me. They had been tracking my schedule more closely than I realized, to make sure I was in my room when the concentration peaked. "I'm allowed to change my routine," I replied. "Of course. Will you be home for dinner tonight?" "I'm not sure. I might eat out." Another pause. "With whom?" "You haven't mentioned friends in months." The interrogation chilled me. Why did he need to know exactly where I was, and with whom? With a friend. Why all the questions, Patrick? "Sorry, Mom. It's just, you've been off lately, more tired, more forgetful. Linda and I worry about your health." The irony made me nauseous. They caused it, and now they pretended to care. "I'm fine," I said, ending it. "Maybe you should see a doctor, just in case." At your age, regular checkups are important. They wanted medical records to legitimize the story of natural illness. "I'll consider it," I said, eager to finish. "Okay, I love you. Be careful." "I love you too," I answered out of decades of habit. When I hung up, I realized my hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. "That call confirms what I feared most," Marco said darkly. "They're not just poisoning you. They're monitoring your reactions, logging symptoms, preparing the endgame." Another text, this time from Hannah. "Mom, Patrick says you're having dinner out with a friend." "Which friend? Can we join?" The thought of sitting across from them in a restaurant, knowing everything, filled me with horror. If they suspected, would they do something reckless in public? "I'm not answering that," I said. "Good." "Let them stew a bit," Marco nodded. He opened the photos on his phone. He'd managed to email himself before Patrick could destroy the camera. "There's something else you need to know." While I was taking pictures, I heard them talking in the kitchen. They thought I was still downstairs. My heart sank. "What did they say?" "Patrick told Hannah you were strange today, evasive, they're suspicious." "Yes, and worse, Hannah said they needed to accelerate the timeline, couldn't wait another 2 months." It felt like a punch to the chest. "What does accelerate mean?" Patrick mentioned a plan B, faster, but riskier. "What is plan B?" They didn't spell it out, but Hannah said to make it look like a family accident, a fire or a fall down the stairs. The implication numbed me. If the slow kill failed, they would act directly. "What else did they say?" Marco hesitated, weighing whether I could take more. "They talked about money. Patrick has gambling debts near $120,000, and Hannah got nothing in the divorce because her ex hired a private investigator and caught her cheating." The pieces locked into place with brutal clarity. Not just greed, both were desperate. "Gambling debts," I whispered. "Loan sharks aren't gentle when collecting." Hannah said they've been applying pressure, threatening violence. And Hannah's divorce? With proof of infidelity, by law she didn't get a financial settlement. Everything snapped into focus in the cruelest way. Patrick didn't just want money, he needed it to stay alive. Hannah was left penniless after the divorce. "So from their perspective, killing me is the only way out," I murmured. "When people are cornered, they can do terrible things. And now that they're suspicious, they may act impulsively," Marco said. "If you want to know who's about to do something reckless, don't just look at their face. Look at the clock and their bank balance. When deadlines press in and the balance hits 0, kindness is the first thing to fall off a person. From this minute on, any message ping could be the countdown." My phone buzzed again, from an unknown number. "Mrs. O'Neill, we know where you are. Boston Park Plaza, room 203. You have 10 minutes to come down to the lobby before we come up." Ice flooded my veins. "Marco, look." I handed him the phone, my hand shaking. "How do they know where you are?" "I haven't told anyone else." "Only you know." Then it struck me. "Is your truck registered with the hotel? The cameras could have recorded us arriving together, possibly. Or they tailed me when I left your house the second time. Once they're suspicious, following us is easy." Another text from Hannah. "Mom, we know you're at the Boston Park Plaza. We don't want to hurt you, we just want to talk. But if you don't come down, Patrick will come up. He's very upset." "They're here," I whispered, staring out the cafe window. "They're somewhere nearby, watching us." Marco sprang to his feet. "Let's go." "There's a back exit through the kitchen. We can get out without being noticed." "Then what? I can't run forever. They're my children. They know every place I love, my friends, my routines." "Exactly why we need the police to arrest them tonight. Once they're in custody, you'll be safe." We hurried toward the back of the cafe. My phone vibrated. I answered without checking who it was. "Mom, why are you running from us?" Hannah's voice, but cold. All the sentimental veneer had fallen away. "You know why, Hannah." Silence stretched. When she spoke again, the pretense was gone. "What do you think we did?" "You know very well. I saw the device in the basement. I saw the tubing into my room. I saw the chemicals and the timers." Silence again, then laughter, hollow and icy. "What device, Mom?" "There's nothing in the basement except ordinary plumbing and the ventilation we installed during the remodel." Now I understood why they'd been so insistent on getting me home. They'd used the past hours to dismantle everything and wipe the evidence clean. "Marco has photos," I said. "Marco? The plumber? Mom, he's a stranger. Why would you trust him over your own children? Isn't it a little odd that some plumber you just met suddenly stuffed paranoid ideas about your family into your head?" The argument was chillingly slick. To an outsider, it is strange for an older woman to trust a stranger over her children. "I'm not paranoid, Hannah. Patrick wants to talk." Before I could object, my son's voice cut in, changed entirely. "Mom, you need to come home now." No longer the worried son. His tone was domineering, almost threatening. "Excuse me? You said you were at the bank and then shopping, but the bank closes at 5 and you didn't buy anything. Where are you really?" "I don't have to explain myself to you, Patrick." "You do, especially when you start acting strange and suspicious." "Suspicious of what?" "The plumber said you asked very specific questions about ventilation, the kind only someone who's suspicious would ask." My blood ran cold. They were putting the pieces together faster than we'd thought. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Come home, Mom. Let's talk like a family. And if I don't?" The pause tightened like a wire. When Patrick spoke again, his voice was ice. "Then we'll come get you." I hung up, my hand shaking violently. We reached the back door. Marco cracked it open to scan the alley. Empty, just a few trash bins and a stray cat. "My truck's 2 blocks over," he whispered. "If we make it there unseen, we'll drive straight to the precinct." We moved quickly, but at the corner, right beside the truck, someone stood. Patrick. We froze and slipped back into the shadows. Patrick held a phone in one hand, an iron bar in the other. He stared into the alley, clearly waiting for us. "He knows your truck," I whispered. "He must have tailed you when you left my house." "Call 911 right here," Marco said, unlocking his phone. Before he could finish dialing, footsteps sounded behind us. We turned. Hannah blocked the way. In her hand was a large syringe filled with a clear liquid. "Hello, Mom," Hannah smiled, a smile that never reached her eyes. "You're hard to find." We were trapped between Patrick and Hannah in a dark alley where no one could see or hear a cry for help. That syringe likely held a concentrated dose of what they'd been using, enough to finish me in minutes. "Hannah, please," I begged. "You're my daughter." "I raised you. I love you. How can you do this?" "Love doesn't pay debts, Mom." Her voice was glacial. Perhaps the daughter I'd raised no longer existed, or maybe she never had. I'd only comforted myself with what I wanted to see. "Love doesn't stabilize my finances," Hannah advanced. "My ex proved I cheated. He made sure I got nothing. I'm staring down bankruptcy. You could have asked me for help. To hear your judgment? Your lectures? No, thanks." Patrick moved forward too. I now saw clearly the iron bar from the car toolkit in his hand. "I don't want to do this, Mom," Patrick said, voice flat. "We planned for you to just drift off. No pain, no fear. You'd get weaker, then not wake up." "You planned to kill me," I said, my voice breaking. "Calculated every detail." "Of course," Hannah replied, raising the syringe. "You think we're stupid enough not to account for every possibility? We know exactly what each substance does, how long it takes. We even scheduled your symptoms. You kept a notebook," I whispered, remembering Marco's words. "You logged every one of my symptoms." "A science experiment," Hannah smiled. "I'm good at chemistry." This is just practical application. Marco stepped in front of me, arms spread. "Put that down and step back, young lady." "Who are you?" Hannah sneered. "A hero in overalls? You think you can save her?" "I am saving her," Marco said, unwavering, "and you're about to be arrested for attempted murder." Patrick barked a dry laugh. "Arrested? Based on what? Your photos?" We dismantled everything. No device, no chemicals, no evidence. "He's right, Marco," I whispered. "They've scrubbed it all." When evil thinks it has erased every trace, what saves you isn't brute strength but timing and the right sound. In a city as loud as Boston, a siren can be a prayer answered. You can't outrun darkness, but you can make the light find you. "Not quite," a woman's voice called from the mouth of the alley. We turned. Framed in the opening stood a female officer in uniform, 3 cruisers idling behind her. "I'm Detective Lauren Patel, Boston Police Department, District E13. Drop what's in your hands and keep your palms where I can see them." I had never heard anything more beautiful than those approaching sirens. Marco had managed to complete the 911 call before Patrick arrived, and he'd shared our location. The police were right on time. Patrick dropped the iron bar and raised his hands, but Hannah still weighed her odds as if about to lunge with the syringe. "Miss, put it down, slowly," Detective Patel ordered, advancing from the opposite side. "There's no way out. Don't make this worse." Hannah looked at me, the syringe clenched in her fist. For a heartbeat, something flickered across her face. Remorse? Doubt? Or just fury that her perfect plan had collapsed? "Remember, Mom," Hannah said softly, voice like ice. "The day you told us, 'You are everything to me,' I thought, then why don't you die sooner and give me the money?" Those words cut deeper than any blade. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act of desperation. It was long-harbored resentment, a cold calculus weighing the value of my life against the cash value of my death. "Drop the syringe now," Detective Patel repeated, sharper. At last, Hannah let go. The syringe shattered, clear liquid spreading across the grimy asphalt. The final dose meant to finish me once the slow-drip plan failed. 30 minutes later, as Patrick and Hannah were cuffed and Mirandized, I sat in the back of an ambulance for a medical check. Marco was giving a detailed statement to Detective Patel, showing her the photos he'd managed to email to himself before Patrick smashed the camera. I looked at my children one last time as they were led away. Patrick kept his head down, avoiding my eyes. Hannah turned and stared straight at me. No regret, no feeling, only annoyance, as if I had ruined a business deal. As the cruisers pulled out with them inside, one thing became blazingly clear. My children had been gone a long time. Perhaps they had never existed as I imagined them. And at last, I was free from the illusion of a family I only thought I had. 6 months have passed since that terrifying night in the dark alley in Copley Square. Patrick and Hannah were arrested and charged with premeditated attempted murder. In a 3-week trial, the entire truth was dragged into the cold light of the law. I sat in the courtroom every day listening as the lawyers, using the impersonal cadence of their profession, described how my children had planned to kill me. Each testimony felt like a knife driven deeper into my heart. Detective Patel testified about what she found when she searched my house under a warrant. Even though Patrick and Hannah had dismantled the main device, they made mistakes in their haste. "We found traces of chemicals in the ventilation ducts leading into Mrs. O'Neill's bedroom," she told the jury. "Some toxins are nearly impossible to eliminate completely. They leave microtraces, and the forensic lab confirmed them." But the most damning evidence was the notebook Hannah had hidden in her room. In their panic to dismantle the setup, she forgot to destroy the written record, her own lab journal. The prosecutor held it up and read each line clearly. Her voice carried through the breathless room. "Weeks 1 to 4, general fatigue can be attributed to old age. Weeks 5 to 8, memory issues, mild confusion. Weeks 9 to 12, shortness of breath, physical weakness. Weeks 13 to 16, severe decline, possible hospitalization, weeks 17 to 20, multi-organ failure, death appears natural. The room fell utterly silent. This was not a crime of passion, not a fit of anger. This was a scientific project, cold, precise, scheduled. At the time of discovery, we were at week 14, the prosecutor continued. According to their timeline, Mrs. O'Neill should have been hospitalized, dying gradually, while doctors struggled with a so-called mystery illness. A block of financial evidence was presented as well. Patrick's gambling debt really was $120,000 owed to Marko Dragic and his loan shark ring, men who had come to the job site and threatened him, giving Patrick 2 months to pay or they would teach him what pain is. Hannah's divorce was as disastrous as Marko had said. Christopher Vaughn hired a private investigator when he suspected his wife was cheating. The evidence was plain as day. Under Massachusetts law, when fault is proven, Hannah received nothing in the division of assets. My client was facing total bankruptcy, Christopher's attorney testified. She had no job, no savings, no prospects, desperate. The two defense attorneys tried to paint Patrick and Hannah as good people driven to the brink, but the prosecutor crushed that notion. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, countless people face financial hardship, crushing debt, the pain of divorce. They do not poison their own mother. They do not install a sophisticated device to kill the woman who gave them life. And they do not record their mother's slow death like a lab experiment. The trial also revealed a detail I could never forgive. This might not have been the first time they calculated the value of a relative's death. A forensic expert re-examined the file on Seamus, my husband. Though the official conclusion was a heart attack 7 years ago, his final week's symptoms were eerily similar to mine. We cannot prove anything after 7 years, the prosecutor said carefully. But the fact that Mrs. O'Neill carried a large policy and the children were secondary beneficiaries raises a question. Was that truly the first time? The implication shattered me right there on the bench. Seamus, the man I loved, did they rehearse on him before perfecting their technique on me? I will never know for sure, but that doubt will haunt me for the rest of my life. Throughout the 3 weeks, Patrick and Hannah showed no remorse. Their testimony circled only around justification, that they were desperate, as if that lessened the crime of plotting to kill their mother. Patrick said, "I had no choice. Marko Dragic would have killed me." Hannah said, "I lost everything. I needed to start over." Not once did they say, "We're sorry, Mom." The jury took only 4 hours to reach a verdict, guilty on all counts. Patrick received 25 years with no parole for the first 15. Hannah got 20 years, eligible for parole after 12. Both appealed, and both were denied. As they were led away, I sat in the courtroom emptied out. This was not a victory. It was the deepest loss a mother can endure, realizing the children I birthed had become monsters. The trial answered the who, what, and when, but it never reached the why. And that question mark is what gnaws at you every night. After the trial, I couldn't go on living in Jamaica Plain. The house I'd loved for 40 years had become a museum of betrayal. Every room was a memory poisoned. I sold it. The process burned, watching strangers walk through, appraising the place that had been my whole world. But I couldn't stay. Not when every night I would lie in the bedroom that had once been fed poison into the air I breathed. With the proceeds, I bought a small apartment in Portland, Maine, a coastal city about 200 miles from Boston. Far enough to start anew, far enough that memories wouldn't chase me around every corner. The apartment is small but bright, with a balcony overlooking Casco Bay. Each morning I brew coffee and watch the sun rise over the water. The salty sea wind blows through, as if cleansing the toxic memories. For the first time in months, I woke without exhaustion. My body is recovering from what Patrick and Hannah did. The doctors at Massachusetts General Hospital confirmed I had been poisoned, but early discovery saved my life. 2 more months, and it might not have been reversible. Marco Santoro has become more than the man who saved my life. He is a dear friend. We write each other every week. Every few months, he drives up to Portland. "How are you feeling?" he asked on a recent visit, the two of us sitting on the balcony, looking out at the sea. "I'm learning how to feel well," I answered honestly. "Some days I still can't believe it all happened. Some nights I bolt upright, check the locks, listen for sounds, afraid they've somehow gotten out. They can't hurt you anymore. I know. But fear isn't always reasonable." Marco nodded. My mother was the same. Even after my brother went to prison, she jumped whenever the phone rang. We were quiet for a while, thinking of mothers betrayed by their own children. "Do you regret anything?" Marco asked softly. "Reporting them? Number? Leaving?" "No," I paused, weighing each word. "I regret being blind. I keep rifling through the past, searching for signs I missed. Then I realize, when you love someone completely, you tend to interpret even the suspicious things in the kindest way." "That isn't a character flaw," he said. "It's human nature, and manipulators know exactly how to exploit it." His words comforted me. I wasn't stupid for trusting my children. I was a mother who loved unconditionally, and 2 children turned that love into a weapon against me. Sometimes I still wonder if there were signs I could have caught earlier. But I've accepted this. When you trust someone utterly, you will soften even the most questionable things. Now, sitting on the balcony, watching the sun sink into the sea, I think about the lessons learned the most painful way. True love isn't based on blood, but on genuine actions and mutual care. Real family are the people who protect you when you're vulnerable, not those who exploit that vulnerability for their own ends. Marco, a total stranger 6 months ago, proved that family sometimes isn't the ones who share your name. I've changed my will. Patrick and Hannah are no longer beneficiaries. Instead, I'm leaving my estate to organizations that support victims of domestic violence and elder abuse. If any good can grow from my pain, let it be helping someone else escape a darkness like the one I once lived in.